Welcome to Clean Air Action's podcast, Cleaning Up Dirty. We talk politics with non-toxic people. I'm Liz Green-Schultz. I run a political nonprofit called Clean Air Action.
And I'm Sean Hoffman, Legislative Director of Clean Air Action. Clean Air Action is the proud sister organization of the Clean Air Council, the oldest environmental and public health organization in Pennsylvania.
Together, we fight for your constitutional right to breathe healthy air. Over here at Clean Air Action, we fight dirty with clean. That applies to anyone who messes with our political and civil rights, including corporations and politicians.
So we're here with another Liz and Sean episode for y'all.
Yeah.
Just the two of us talking the talk.
We like to functionally shoot the shit, and Sean and I have these conversations all the time, so we wanted to bring it to the listeners and give a sense of the VP candidates, because we have a sense of the presidential candidates, so let's dig into the Veeps a little bit.
Yeah, functionally shooting the shit. We should have that on our business cards. We do. Even when we're not working, that's what we're doing. Yeah, we're in Veep territory here. There's been a lot of chatter about vice presidential candidates.
Well, listen, I need my snacks lined up before we dive in.
I mean, it's a kind of a sorry selection of snacks today. It was like, I described it as like the snacks left over in your grandmother's purse, like at the bottom. Or, oh, I think we got like a gum, like, or something down here.
Well, my partner in crime here is throwing me right under the bus because I forgot my cool snack bag. So we have the backup snack bag. But listen, these are not backup snacks. These are solid snacks. It's just literally Easter candy, and it's nowhere near Easter.
We have one of those like 6-pack of Oreos. I think you get them out of like airport vending machines. I think is the only place. And they're not crumbled. That would absolutely mark the bottom of the purse version if it was a pack of crumbled cookies. And then Skittles. There's, it's fine.
Solid snacks, just not, it's no pickle roulette. Let's put it that way.
If anything, yes, I should be relieved that pickle roulette has not reappeared. Did anybody finish that bag? Did you finish that whole bag? Or what would you even call them? Candies?
I'm going to plead the fifth.
You did, didn't you? They're gone. You ate them all, guys.
Listen, they're really good. I don't know what to tell you.
Except for the pickle ones.
Well, listeners, as always, if you have questions or there's a deep dive you'd like to hear from Sean and I, send questions via our socials at Clean Air Action. Sean is already diving into the Skittles. See, look, you're criticizing me about the snack selection and you're diving right in.
You've raised the bar pretty high at this point. I'm expecting some novelty of some sort.
Listen, Easter candy late summer is quite the novelty, I would say.
Yeah, it is.
Well, Sean and I tend to understand the system better than your average person, I think, if we can claim that level of expertise, because we're both lawyers who have worked in politics for years. So we try to unpack some of what you might see in the headlines and keep it interesting with the snacks.
Indeed. And for my part, at least, I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about the minutia of this stuff because I'm a giant politics nerd. And,
nerd.
Liz can confirm.
Yes. Literally every other sentence. I'm like, how do you know? Why do you know that?
Why and how?
It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it is our listeners' cup of tea.
That's right. That's right. So I'm happy to be on the show.
Well, I don't want to dive too hard into nerddom. So can we start by talking about Tim Walz's style of dress? Because it's something.
Let's get right to it.
It's something we've been dissecting a little bit. It's sometimes there's a tie, sometimes there's no tie. This is a trend that I have forced on Sean, actually, because I am very into the tie-less look. Our governor, Josh Shapiro, does the tie-less look. I think it's very GQ. So I threatened to fire Sean if he didn't take his tie off.
Which I should say, folks, lawyer in the northeastern part of the United States, a suit and tie is like the uniform. I clerked for a judge who that was his thing. That this is the lawyer's uniform, suit and tie. That's just what you do. And so I was a little it felt a little weird. It felt like I was, suit with no tie. Like, what am I doing here? What kind of
You were not here for it at first.
It was just,
but I was right.
You were totally right. I gave it a try. One recent trip to Harrisburg, to the Capitol, and there were some heads turning. Like, who's this tie-less guy?
Is that J.D. Vance without a tie?
You know, exactly.
To the listeners,
fashion statement.
if you haven't seen, Sean looks a little bit like JD Vance.
Yeah.
A younger,
I've
more
had-
GQ version.
Thank you, Liz. And I've had, I mean, so many people now and they're always like, I don't want, they're like afraid they're going to offend me. You know, like, I'm sorry. I don't even want to say it, but, and I'm like, it's fine, guys. It's okay.
It's so delicious. I'm going to go for a Skittle because it is very, very amusing.
I think we have pretty different philosophies. He's a little older than me. He's married with kids. He served in the military.
Listen, we'll get to JD Vance. We're still on Tim Walz, Tylus Tim Walz.
Tylus Tim. That's
Tylus Tim.
what his friends call him.
You characterized him as having the vibes of like a dad who just mowed the lawn.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, so when he's not wearing like a suit, he's like t-shirt and jeans kind of. Yeah, like looks like the dad who just finished mowing the lawn or like changing your oil on your car. Like you go to work and like, oh yeah, I just changed your oil for you. You know, his car was running a little funny. That's what he usually looks like, is that dad. And I think, frankly, he looks a little older than his actual age. He's only 60. I think he kind of looks like, you know, at first glance, I was like, this is a guy probably in his 70s. But he has joked many times, that's what happens when you run a cafeteria for 20 years in a high school, that it ages you beyond your years. Can you?
Cafeteria duty was the worst draw.
I knew you were a teacher for better part of a decade,
8 years,
right?
yeah.
And that was high school too, wasn't it?
It was. So if you can imagine high school kids at lunch, it's kind of every teacher's nightmare. Yeah. So when you got your duty assignment, you're like, please don't be cafeteria. Please don't be cafeteria.
And that was where Governor Walz was, in the trenches. And that's a thing that would, prematurely age a human?
100%. I still have plenty of stories from cafeteria duty. We'll have to save that for another podcast episode. But I can understand the premature aging there. But Tim Walz cleans up nice. We'll say that.
You know, he's you could even say that that's part of his appeal, his savvy, right? His everyman kind of vibe is that even when he's suited up, you can certainly find him with a tie on. That's the thing. We Googled it. He wears the ties. But, you know, the fact that he's either sporting the t-shirt, like casual dad look, or the tieless look lends itself again to, I think, what his bread and butter has been as a politician, which is relating to everyday Americans.
And so we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Kamala's dress a little bit as well.
She's also a Veep. I know this is something that, you know, it doesn't get talked about enough, I think.
Kamala's wardrobe choices?
Kamala's wardrobe choices, indeed, because it is, and I think particularly for women and guys with it, again, that you're either wearing a suit or you're not. And if you're not, that in and of itself is the, you know, top. But even then, it's like, what do you wear, a sweater vest and a button down? There's not a lot with men's fashion and politics. There's not a whole lot of, I think, strategic options one could utilize. Whereas I think with women, especially someone...
Well, I'm just going to actually have to interrupt you and circle back to Kamala's wardrobe, because while you're talking, I'm thinking of Lil Jon's wardrobe at the DNC, which was pretty salient. And, you know, who expected Lil Jon to just pop up at the DNC?
Not me. But boy, was I happy to see him.
I'll tell you what was not on my 2024 bingo is hearing Get Low at the DNC. A song that, you know, if you were in high school in the early 2000s, I don't think you would expect to fast forward to 2024 and see it on national television during the Democratic National Convention.
And here we are, from the window to the walls. That's...
to the walls. To the walls!
Yes, that's the whole thing, man. I
just got that.
Lil Jon's genius.
Should we cut that part? Should I not be admitting that I did not get that?
No, it's funny.
But yeah, I didn't expect to see a blonde Lil Jon with a...
What was he wearing? For folks who haven't seen the clip.
A very shiny suit. Well, a vest with matching pants that was kind of like a very shiny blue with a number of buttons and something that I at first thought was a pearl necklace. I don't think it actually was a pearl necklace, but I'll tell you what, I didn't expect to see any of that. It's been a very, very exciting time in politics these days. So back to Kamala's dress.
What do you think? So there's been... She seems to have, you and I have talked about this, she seems to have a distinctive style.
Yeah, and the first time we talked about this was when Sean and I were at the rally in Philly, that first day that Tim Walz was announced as the VP candidate. And I commented while we were there that I was really intrigued by what she was wearing because, you know, there's a subtlety in her wardrobe choices. She is not dressing the way that I would have expected. And I think maybe that's the point.
How so?
So
what would you expect?
You don't really notice necessarily what she's wearing. And oddly, that's why I noticed it, because I thought it was, she's so vivacious that her wardrobe to me doesn't match that. And I actually suspect that's quite intentional because
Interesting.
She's very feminine. She laughs. She's really pretty. And so maybe as a national political candidate, it would be overboard to dress her poppin' type of, to me, her wardrobe is not poppin'. And I think that is quite intentional. Specifically at the Philly rally, she was wearing a suit that obviously fit her well, but it kind of loose pants. I pulled up a picture so I could narrate for the listeners. Loose pants. And then the blazer goes down to the top of her legs, which is kind of unusual cut for a woman's blazer. So it's covering her a little bit. And then she was not wearing fierce heels, which
Heels could have been fiercer.
Heels could have been fiercer. So I feel like if I were dressing for a rally like this, I would go for the fierce heels. And the fact that she's not wearing that, I found really interesting. And then she wears frequently these blouses with a bow. So there's, femininity there, but it's not tied in a bow. It's just like a tie. So you almost wouldn't even notice the bow. And also kind of a wide lapel for a women's suit. And then, of course, there were these articles about her taupe suit maybe being a deep cut troll. Because years ago, conservatives called Obama out for being, quote, unpresidential for wearing a tan suit. So there was
Heaven forbid.
Heaven forbid. A congressman.
He had a tie on, though, still. It was,
he did.
So he wasn't that guy. Come on, guys. Give him a break.
A congressman even told reporters, quote, there's no way I don't think any of us can excuse what the president did for wearing a tan suit. So can you imagine if he was wearing no tie?
How the times have changed.
I'll tell you what, people will complain about anything. That is definitely something that we know in 2024. But just to close the loop on Kamala's wardrobe choices, she wore a purple coat, which was controversial because it's viewed as a sign of bipartisanship, and a green cape dress, which I don't think I've seen politicians in. So it's very interesting. And as much as I hate being the woman who works in politics talking about Kamala's wardrobe choices, it's worth drawing out.
You're the only one on the show who could talk about it, because when I hear cape dress, I'm immediately like, is that like a superhero get up of some sort? I'm just saying that this is why your insight on this is critical.
Priceless, even.
Priceless, you might say. If I recall, as a prosecutor, as attorney general, I think that has sort of been the style she's kind of stuck to. So I'm curious if you think that goes even deeper than that, as a woman in a high profile, high powered, intense, historically male dominated profession.
I love that you just asked that. And I will say this was not on the podcast plan. So we're riffing, guys. We're riffing here. But I can speak to that, actually, because I spent years and years in criminal courtrooms. And it was always a thing with women's dress.
This is kind of a lawyer thing, and it's probably one of those, awful gatekeeping status things that are part of the legal profession. But I mean, even just guys in suits and ties. I remember when I was clerking for the judge, you would remark on, oh yeah, that guy's his tie. You see how he tied his tie? You see how the length between belts? They're like, what's the gap? Or what kind of suit? It is such a thing.
I didn't know it was a thing for guys as well, actually.
It absolutely is.
Yeah. Well, for women, part of your training for certain courtrooms was what to wear and what not to wear based on what that judge wanted to see from you as a woman. Probably every female attorney has a story like this. So this is still such a thing in the professional world. Maybe that's part of what caught my attention about Kamala's dress, that it is particularly, I would say, demure, unspicy,
mindful.
Not Vogue, It's
demure.
interesting.
That's right. Too.
She's a childless cat lady, so there's that.
That's how they dress, I hear. Well, and it's interesting too. Your experience.
Speaking as one, by the way, I'm also a childless cat lady.
Good company. Your experience was just a few years ago, though, right? Whereas Kamala coming up, that would have been a couple decades ago. And thus, I would imagine even more of something that she as a woman trying to make it in that profession would have to put some thought into.
I'm sure she would have very interesting things to add to this. And in our Kamala episode, we talk about her travels and how expectations for women have changed and evolved over the last 5 years or so. So it's interesting to see the ripples of all of this. And of course, right now I'm thinking about Hillary's dress, which she was kind of a sharp dresser, and her
famous for the pantsuits, right?
Famous for the pantsuits, and her comment that she helped put a lot of cracks in the highest, hardest glass ceiling in hopes, obviously, that Kamala can break through it in her demure pantsuit.
If VP Harris makes it, I have no doubt that there will be a lot more fashion discussion going forward.
Well, before we get to the Veep candidates, Sean, I got to ask your favorite moment of the DNC thus far. Putting you on the spot because I also didn't tee this up, but I know you've been a big fan. There's been a number of patriotic moments. You know, we've talked on the podcast that I was not especially enthusiastic about Biden as a candidate, but when he said, "America, I gave my best to you," I teared up a little bit. I'll be honest.
Yeah, I mean, being the patriotic fool that I am, I born on the 4th of July, love this country. I just watching the conventions. I think it's a patriotic thing. The thing that I've liked the most so far, I think, was the roll call. For folks who have no idea what that is, it's, for both conventions, every 4 years, they go through state by state, and they ask each state delegation, to say who they're casting their votes for. And it's usually just pro forma. Everybody already knows who is getting the votes. But, this time around, the Dems, I don't know whose idea it was, but I thought it was brilliant. They kind of turned it into a party. They had a DJ, and there was music for each state, oftentimes from an artist from that state. And each delegation used it as an opportunity to sort of show off and talk about their state and historic figures from that state and the enthusiasm that they bring to the table. And I thought that was just so cool. And it's like 50 states plus DC plus the territories. There's so much diversity in this big giant country of ours, and in every sense of the word. And it just made me feel super patriotic. Even if Lil Jon hadn't killed it, the Georgia delegation, it was pretty hard to follow up that one after Lil Jon brought the house down. But
Nelly got a shout out. It's what a time to be alive.
That's the sort of thing that I think both parties, any politician anywhere should be thinking of. How do you make it more interesting and fun while still doing the things you're supposed to do? Because a lot of people get turned off by politics because it's boring, because there's minutia, all the old,
corruption.
Well, there's that too. But
so we're seeing this creative ways of engaging the people with politics. I'll Skittles to that.
I will too. Skittles.
Cheers. Skittles cheers.
Skittles cheers.
One of my favorite DNC moments was when Tim Walz was talking to a reporter and his kids were giving him bunny ears behind. That was so adorable, so charming.
Which is the perfect way, to circle back to Governor Walz. And it just sums up the energy that he brings and his family. His kids seem to be great people. His daughter, Hope, I think, just graduated from college. She's a social worker. His son is still in high school, Gus.
Again, with the encyclopedic, not what person just happens to know this about Tim Walz.
I've done my homework.
Shall we dive into Tim Walz a little bit?
Yeah.
So he's 60 years old. He's the governor of Minnesota.
Looks like he's 70. But his energy, the guy, he runs. He's a runner. Saw a clip of him running around Chicago with the Secret Service following him.
He had great energy at the Philly convention. He and Kamala, that was the first time they were on stage together, and it was really remarkable, absolute electricity in the Liacouras Center.
And I'm sure there's some people who might criticize him for this, but he's very clearly taking his role as Kamala's number one cheerleader to heart. That is to say, he seems very mindful of his role as the vice president, as the sidekick, as the Robin to her Batman, if you will. For example, when they're working the line at some of these rallies, you'll see Walz grab something for Kamala to sign and go physically get it and run it back to Kamala because he saw someone in the audience, in the crowd, who had a thing. And
very chivalrous, very gentlemanly.
well, there's that, but I think it's deeper than that, honestly, in that I think it speaks to this dynamic at play where he's very mindful of the optics, and in a way that perhaps, we didn't see the same dynamic with Hillary Clinton and her choice for running mate, Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. Walz is like the ultimate happy warrior who's like, I could not be happier to be the number 2. Like, I am so stoked to run around for Kamala Harris on the stage, jumping up and down like a goofball, getting people hyped for her, going out and grabbing the poster from the kid in the audience to get Kamala to sign it. And frankly, I think in a way...
he really reads Coach.
He reads Coach big time. And I think...
He was a high school football coach.
I don't know that we've ever quite seen that vibe from a vice presidential candidate before. Almost a willingness... to dive into the dad coach vibes, like in a way that you could maybe say like, oh, it lacks seriousness. It goes with The Office. But I actually think, again, it feeds in.
That's what people want to see right now.
This is what people want, authenticity. And it feeds back to that, the idea with why was the roll call so fun? Because they made it fun.
Yeah.
They made it approachable. Walz is a great retail politician that way, and I think that's what he's bringing here.
I gotta ask you, because I'm not familiar with the term retail politician.
Retail politician, as opposed to wholesale, where retail politician is person to person, working the ropes at an event, shaking hands, slapping backs, kissing babies. Another old term they used for it is pressing the flesh.
Pressing the flesh. Well, this is why I asked, because to me, retail politician sounds like bargain basement discount.
Right.
And I was like, I'm hoping my assumption is incorrect.
No, it just refers to sort of like a much more personal level of politicking as opposed to more wholesale, where you're making big giant speeches, you're doing television interviews, that sort of thing. If you want a like all-time champ of a retail politician, Bill Clinton in his prime is sort of like one of the ultimate modern examples. That guy was just... And Walz brings a similar energy.
I never thought of the connection there, but I can see it because Walz is... It's like if your favorite teacher was the VP candidate.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it, Liz, that like we all of us have like one or two teachers growing up where they were just so great. Loved going to their class, made a real impression on you. And I certainly had. He was a social studies teacher, I think.
He was the high school football coach. And a fascinating fact about him, he helped launch a gay-straight alliance as the high school football coach. To have both of those things is pretty extraordinary.
Totally. In a place that's, where this isn't...
Pretty conservative.
This isn't like, Manhattan we're talking about here. This is a fairly rural... middle American kind of place. And what, 20 years ago plus that happened?
That's probably right. And as a teacher, I can speak to the importance of my students feeling safe in my classroom. So too often politics influence the classroom. We talk about that in our podcast episode with Eleanor Breslin about Bucks County. But for adults, sometimes that looks like, well, if I don't believe in homosexuality or I don't like that a student is identifying as gay, but the student needs to learn, irrespective of anybody's opinions about anything remotely political. But I've not heard of football coaches diving into that territory by helping launch gay-straight alliances. So I absolutely love that about Tim Walz, that he fought for his kids, irrespective of what anybody might think about that. And I would love to see that energy in the White House.
Yeah. And what a statement I would imagine it made as the very dad-looking football coach of the school being the guy, the advisor for the Gay-Straight Alliance in the school. And again,
I'm thinking of Friday Night Lights right now.
Yeah. I mean, that just sort of shows you the kind of guy he is as far as leadership and courage and just trying to make sure everyone's on the bus.
He was also in the Army National Guard for better part of 25 years, and he was the Nebraska Citizen Soldier of the Year in 1989. So for him to have done some of what we've seen from him is really, really cool.
Yeah.
He also taught in China for a year, speaks some Mandarin.
Right.
Really fascinating guy.
The guy's got quite a background, and We were talking about this earlier that, obviously he's going to be vice president, but if Harrison Walz wins, there's certainly the expectation that Walz himself might go on to be a presidential candidate, whether Vice President Harris gets 2 terms or not. And to have someone potentially as the leader of the country at some point with such a diverse background. We talk about some of his time in Congress as well. He served on the Ag Committee in the House, Veterans Affairs Committee. This is a guy who's got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge in various areas.
And I will note that even though we have that in our podcast research, Sean is saying that off the top of his head. Again, a little encyclopedia. It's very, very convenient for me to have a colleague with this depth of knowledge.
But I think interesting to look at his career in politics, though. We've talked a lot about his personal background, a bit about his professional, but he was in Congress for quite a while, I think over a decade, and he represented a rural district that was pretty conservative. The fact that he won it in the first place was a big deal. Then the minute he decided not to run anymore, it went back to Republicans. For a Democrat to win and hold that district as long as he did, you can't do that without being a very savvy politician who knows how to speak to the people.
Undoubtedly, one of his motivations is his dad died when he was 19 of lung cancer. So this is clean air action. We fight for your right to breathe clean air. So that's something that jumps right out at me. And he commented that the last week of his dad's life cost his mom a decade of going back to work to pay off the debt. So that's the type of thing that will galvanize you right into politics.
Sure. I mean, obviously knows about healthcare and the difficulties folks have around that and affording it and accessing it. But also, you lose a parent that young, it really matures you quickly, whether you like it or not. Let's get into his Enviro stuff, because that's kind of our jam here on Cleaning Up Dirty.
Even though we saw more progressive politics from him while he was governor compared to when he was a rep, he was criticized by environmental orgs of not going far enough and being friendly with polluting industry and agriculture. Now, some of that activity predated his administration, but orgs argue that he didn't do enough to fix the trend. And of course, as environmentalists who work in politics, we talk a lot about political realities and various political pressures there.
I mean, we certainly don't like it. We at Clean Air Action are believers in the idea that you can have great public health, a healthy, thriving environment, and a robust economy. Those 3 things are not mutually exclusive.
Not remotely.
However, politics often puts leaders in places where they have to make those kinds of trade-offs, or they feel they have to make those kinds of trade-offs, because industry, boy, do they hate regulation. Industry howls every time a regulation is proposed. That, they howl from the mountaintops about how it's gonna just destroy the economy, and they're gonna have to let people go, and it's gonna be so devastating, and
and gee, they'd have less to contribute to political campaigns,
and I mean, they'd have to cut their multi-billion-dollar profits by a couple of bucks, God forbid. But it's easy for us here on this podcast to say that. But when you're, and we've seen the same Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania in a similar kind of position where, again, it certainly happens more than it should, but in order to make progress, any kind of progress in the right direction on a number of these environmental and public health issues, sometimes these guys have to make compromises that we don't like or wouldn't make, but
especially as governor of a state that's not New York or California.
Right. And again, with a very closely divided legislature, maybe you see a few Democrats who are like, I'm really on the fence about this. And you need just about every one of them.
Or my district's going to vote me out if we do.
Yeah. And again, we see that very same thing play out here in Pennsylvania where, for example, a Democrat in a very fossil fuel heavy region of the state, if you want to get them to vote for something climate friendly, oftentimes, whoever's pushing the legislation is going to have to do some things to make them feel comfortable with it, some assurances that they're not committing political suicide by supporting it. And that's exactly what we were talking about with Waxman-Markey in Congress, where Walz probably himself was in that position, that very same position of, if you want me to vote for this thing, I need to feel comfortable that I'm not going to go back to my district and they're going to destroy me for it. And so I would imagine that as far as permitting and regulations go in Minnesota, that was probably the trade-off the governor had to make.
Particularly when this industry has such a stronghold in politics and push back on regulation, as we've talked about, and partly because they are trying to maximize their profits. They're corporations. They have a duty to shareholders. So as much as we like to rage against corporations from a legal standpoint, they have a duty to their shareholders, and they are, assuming best intent, trying to maximize those profits for their shareholders, which is why we have government regulation to protect the people and public health.
Yeah, I mean, as great as it would be for every corporate CEO to be totally and completely altruistic, in addition to trying to be, a titan of industry, that's just not how the world works. And so, yeah, I think to the extent we being anybody who cares about this stuff complains about the actions of corporations, to your point, yeah, they exist to make money and get returns to their shareholders hopefully within the confines of the law.
Hashtag capitalism.
Hashtag capitalism. And so
we're seeing more corporate health, if you will, as the people are pushing for it in 2024, but it's still capitalism.
Right. And so then the onus falls on government to police those industries to make sure they don't do too much damage to the environment or to our public health.
And comply with existing law.
Maybe the existing law, maybe that's not good enough, depending on the issue. I mean, and we've seen, again, getting back to Governor Walz and some of the environmental things he's gotten done, push for stricter car emission standards, like the California standards, which is the strictest in the nation.
Minnesota.
In Minnesota, that's something
kind of a big deal.
Ban on PFAS, or also known as forever chemicals, on consumer goods. That is absolutely the sort of thing that corporations love PFAS in consumer goods because it's effective at what it does. It just happens to be toxic as hell. And so that's where the government needs to step in and say, nope, you can't make this stuff with toxic as hell elements anymore. Sorry, that's a restriction. And I guarantee
Tim Walz did that.
And I guarantee the PFAS manufacturers were screaming and hollering about how it's going to be so onerous for them, and like, oh, how are we going to have our fast food wrappers without PFAS in them anymore? The food's going to be sticking to the wrapper. How are we going to live? But, I think, again, this is where the people in the government need to step up and say, no, that's ridiculous. Find a way to make a fast food wrapper that isn't going to give us cancer. But, again, you got to navigate politics to make that happen. Again, as so many people say, as a blue state, that is a big oversimplification. You look at the map of what voters are concentrated where, and Minnesota is a big, big state. And it is a vast sea of red surrounding the very tiny island of the Twin Cities that is a deep blue bastion.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're not talking about California blue or New York blue.
Right.
And we would be remiss if we didn't mention that Governor Walz unveiled Minnesota's Climate Action Framework in 2022, which was a 69-page climate plan. And he created a climate change subcabinet to manage Minnesota's climate response efforts. And these are definitely not things that we see from all politicians.
Right.
So all things considered, he is a pretty strong VP candidate in terms of environmental considerations.
Arguably, of those that were under consideration, as far as things he's actually done, Governor Walz is probably the strongest on environmental stuff.
Yeah.
Across the board.
Looking at you, Governor Shapiro. Got to step your game up a little bit.
Hey, once he gets a majority, then we'll see.
Then it's ladders to the sky.
Ladders to the sky, baby. Look out.
Now, Walz is also pretty poor for a VP. he doesn't have investments in stocks, bonds, other securities, and continued to forego ownership of any securities, which I gather is fairly unusual as a VP candidate.
You just as a politician, I think he worked in Congress. He was in D.C. on the national level. I would, I don't know off the top of my head, but I would wager that the percentage of members of Congress and governors that have no investments at all, and or B, are not like rich. Speaking of Veeps, former Vice President Mike Pence was noteworthy for not being especially wealthy. He also was a governor, and how long he was in politics, he was not considered. I'm sure he had some investments, but especially compared to Donald Trump, he was considered, a pauper. But Walz falls into that same kind of category. I mean, I don't think he's poor by any stretch of the imagination, but he's not a stocks and bonds kind of guy.
I just Googled it. A majority of lawmakers are millionaires. So, and now we got our favorite teacher, Tim Walz, running for VP.
Right?
It's a pretty cool thing.
Talk about man of the people.
Man of the people. He could change your oil. He could, mow your lawn.
Absolutely.
And then we get to J.D. Vance.
My doppelganger. J.D. Vance. No relation. Can confirm.
Just a little bit of a pivot from Tim Walz to J.D. Vance.
Different kind of styles, different type of guys. But as far as their environmental record, listen, this is a nonpartisan podcast, but the fact that we focus on environment and public health, by and large, we end up working with or focused on a lot of Democrats, because policies Republicans are putting forth are, by and large, pay lip service to doing good stuff for public health and the environment. They tend to be giveaways to industry and really don't move us in the right direction as far as those things go. J.D. Vance, absolutely.
And of course, we evaluate each candidate based on their individual stances on issues, but overwhelmingly, Republicans are not seeking our endorsements.
Right. And even if they were, again, it is extremely unusual to see an environmental or public health proposal put forth by Republicans that is, in my opinion, serious, that really would do what needs to be done to improve our public health and our environment. And again, J.D. Vance certainly fits that mold. There is a piece of legislation, the National Railway Safety Act, that he is a prime sponsor for.
I was actually shocked when I realized that J.D. Vance was the co-sponsor of this, because that is a really important bill.
We've spoken out a lot about East Palestine and the derailment there that resulted in a lot of toxic exposure for folks there, particularly as a result of vinyl chloride, which is a toxic chemical that the train was transporting, a petrochemical.
And we have a website, stillhere.org, where you can take actions to call for the passage of the Railway Safety Bill.
Absolutely.
In hopes of protecting your community from something like the East Palestine derailment. So I love that J.D. Vance co-sponsored that, and that's nearly the end of the list of things I love.
It is literally the end of the list. He has a 0% record from the League of Conservation Voters, which rates federal politicians on their environmental actions. He's got a 0% rating. And the National Railway Safety Act hasn't passed yet. Maybe that score will tick up a smidge if it does. He'll
have a 1% from.
Yeah, it'll be up to 1. So it's good legislation that would improve the safety of our rails. I think he could have been much more full-throated, frankly, as far as being a champion for that. He created that bill not long after he was elected, and then suddenly, perhaps thinking, well, I want to be friendlier to industry, maybe I want to make a run for vice president, who knows? He doesn't really seem to be vocally championing that bill.
Which is a bummer, because we were hoping to see it pass this fall. And perhaps he will have other things to worry about this fall. So maybe we're not going to see that pushed forward. He has a JD. He's a lawyer. He went to Yale Law in 2013. He was a venture capitalist for 5 years. And he has a bachelor's in poli-sci and philosophy from Ohio State University. He was in the Marine Corps. But kind of a small record as far as politicians go. He's
new. He hasn't been in politics all that long. Some folks might say that that's an asset. I personally think that there's a lot to be said for experience, for knowing how these systems work, because sometimes you see these folks coming out of a career in industry, and maybe they have a ton of money, maybe they already have a high profile and can afford to run for big stuff. But then they get into office and they find, this is complicated and complex and different in ways that I didn't realize, in ways I didn't encounter in the corporate world. And I could go on with examples of that, but I think Vance probably falls into that category.
I agree. Two of my favorite Vance facts, none of the bills he's sponsored or co-sponsored have become law. And he referred to Trump as America's Hitler and is now his running mate.
I will say so on both of those things. We can't beat him up too much for his stuff not becoming law yet. He's still a little baby senator. But on the flip side of that, to sort of argue for myself about it, there's workhorses and show horses in Congress. And how much is he actually trying to be a workhorse or a show horse? My guess is that this run for Senate was a springboard to try and be the vice president or even run for president one day. Trying to pull an Obama here, take a brief stint in the Senate and then use that as a springboard for bigger things. As far as the flip-flopping on his thoughts on President Trump, I think we need to give politicians a little bit of wiggle room to change their positions as time goes on, as new information comes out, as times change.
Totally agree. We talk about the importance of grace for people changing their positions when they're confronted with new information or when that information changes. And to me, America's Hitler does not fall into that category, but that's just me.
That's pretty sharp language. It's one thing to say like, oh, well, I was passing some things that were friendly to ag before, and now I'm taking another look at those pesticides, as opposed to calling somebody Hitler one day and then, a little further down the road, you know what? Yeah, like I will absolutely serve as his number 2 for as long as he needs me. Like, come on. Because I don't think there's anyone in this nation who with a straight face can say that Trump has changed his tune between now and 2016, or frankly, even before that. He is what he is, love him or hate him. So for someone to just, say like, oh, well, yeah, I said that one day and I'm saying that, I think that there's a big difference between that and just sort of altering your position to a gentle degree.
Yeah.
For him to say one thing and then go back on it in such strong terms, I think he believed the Hitler remark that Trump was dangerous and problematic, and then made the calculated decision for political reasons to say, well, I can't say that anymore because I want to be this guy's running mate. So I got to clean those up. It's a thing we see countless times in politics. And frankly,
and even saw in our own families, because that America's Hitler comment was in 2016 at the beginning of Trump's first run. And I have a beloved family member who hated Trump at the beginning of that run and then voted for him in the general, which I was really shocked to see, and then voted for him a second time. So maybe Vance is a part of that group of people who at first didn't like what he was seeing and was really easy to dismiss, but then as Trump picked up followership, softened his views.
I think that's a very generous interpretation of Vance's, because he's not just some guy out in the world who's like got to make a choice for who he's going to vote for president, right? This guy is obviously extremely ambitious. You don't become a senator. He's been a senator again. It is very Obama-esque, honestly. He's been a senator for not even 2 years yet, and now he's already on the ticket. And he stepped over some other very, very qualified, competitive alternatives that Trump was considering. And so, again, I think for politicians who should know better, who are very clearly intelligent, experienced, educated, to then march out there and say some stuff that they absolutely know and feel in their hearts that is not true. There's a special place in hell for those kind of politicians. I'll just say it. They would just get up there and just straight lie. Go home and say one thing behind closed doors and then go out there in front of the people and say something else just because it's politically expedient.
I'm wondering how many of our listeners are hearing that and thinking, well, that's just politics for you.
And that's why we got the situations we have here. I think we're seeing a new generation of politicians step up. Again, what's the currency of the age right now? Authenticity. Where you're seeing people more and more lean into that.
Like I changed deleting tweets that called Trump reprehensible and an idiot. Is that the style of authenticity we're seeing from JD Vance?
Exactly. Exactly. And so I think politics is politics, and sometimes you got to get up there and maybe defend some stuff you're not crazy about, and contort yourself sometimes to make things make sense or justify it. But the degree to which some politicians do it is just, to me, so beyond the pale that I think it'd be hard to look yourself in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm doing the people's work here.
So for all of these reasons and more, Clean Air Action is very excited to endorse the Harris Walls ticket.
Absolutely. And, we can talk more about those sorts of politicians stuff maybe on other episodes, because I think there's a lot to explore there. But just to sort of put a cap on the whole position of vice president, I think it's fascinating that now in this era, there's so much talk and discussion about vice presidents, when historically the position of vice president was a place where political careers went to die, because you don't really have any authority. You're the president of the Senate, but that's mostly ceremonial, and you cast tie-breaking votes when there is one.
And even more so the candidates. When you said Tim Kaine, I thought, who's that? Oh, yeah, Tim Kaine.
Right, exactly.
Sorry, Tim Kaine. Where's he at these days?
He's still in the Senate. He is Virginia senator. That's the thing of it too, right? How much of an impact in an election and during an administration does a vice president make? Obviously that depends on who it was in that position. But I think in recent years, between Dick Cheney and Joe Biden, the role as Veep has been totally redefined. And I think the American people, because of those guys, have an elevated expectation now, perhaps, for this role of vice president being more impactful than it ever was throughout most of American history. And time will tell if Tim Walz can continue that trend. I think, maybe we'll see something totally new from him. Maybe will take it to a whole new level, given his energy and experience. It wouldn't surprise me.
Some of that energy and experience is translating into these sayings we keep hearing that I'm really feeling. We can't go back.
Can't go back.
Can't go back. And when
Forward.
we fight, we win.
That's right.
For the people and the planet.
Onwards and upwards.
Ladders to the sky.
That's right.
Well, thank you to our listeners for listening to Cleaning Up Dirty. To help us clean up dirty, follow us at Clean Air Action everywhere on social media and subscribe to Cleaning Up Dirty wherever you stream podcasts.